Microphone check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Table mic number 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Table mic number 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Table mic number 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Table mic 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Table mic number 1, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome, everyone. We'll be starting in 1 minute. Thank you. Have to wait for the live stream to queue up, so appreciate your patience. Good evening and welcome. My name is Melissa Leffis, and on behalf of our family and the Parthenon Project Advisory Board and team, we're delighted to have you with us this evening for the panel discussion, Rethinking a United Kingdom-Greece Cultural Partnership within the British Museum's Reimagination. What's next for the Parthenon Sculptures? For the last several years, the Parthenon Project has campaigned for the reunification of the sculptures in Athens on the basis of a forward-looking, ambitious cultural partnership between the UK and Greece. Our approach seeks to mutually benefit both countries and generations to come. We believe this is an opportunity for two great allies to seize and to demonstrate what leadership looks like on the world stage, a true win-win solution. I would like to now invite Lord Vaizey, co-chair of the Parthenon Project, to provide his introductory remarks.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here, and my name is Ed Vaizey. I'm the co-chair of the Parthenon Project, and here's a sentence I never thought I would utter. It's so nice to see David Frost here this evening. David and I were on different sides of the great debate on Britain's future in Europe, but we are both members of the House of Lords, both colleagues in the Conservative Party. But it's a great testament that David is on the panel today talking about an issue that's become very close to my heart. I am a sinner that is repenting. I was the culture minister for 6 years, and I only merit a footnote in Geoffrey Robertson's great book about the Parthenon Sculptures, and unfortunately that footnote is a ministerial letter from me. I can't remember who I think I was writing to UNESCO or someone, telling them where to get off when it came to taking back our Elgin marbles. But that's because I wasn't thinking about the subject at all, and I had inherited and drunk deeply of the received position, the received wisdom about the British establishment. I was going to say in Britain, but actually the British people are much wiser than the British establishment, that the Elgin marbles are ours. And of course they're not, they're the Parthenon Sculptures. But the reason I find the Parthenon Project such a fulfilling and wonderful organisation to be part of is that it goes far beyond just simply asking for a historical wrong to be connected. It's imaginative, thoughtful, and it's engaging. And it presents, in my view, an overwhelming case, as was said, a win-win situation where Britain will benefit massively from what might seem to be an altruistic act. The opportunity to establish further deep cultural ties with Greece, the opportunity to borrow some priceless objects never seen outside of Greece before, the opportunity to deepen our scholarship and understanding of Greek culture, but also how Greek culture has so affected our own culture. So it's a really exciting project. I feel that the momentum is going in one particular direction, but it is like any project, one that moves forward in fits and starts. So we're going to have a wonderful debate this evening, full of thoughtful musings on this issue. I want to just pick out one person in the audience, Andrew George MP. His political career also goes in fits and starts. He keeps winning his seat, then losing it, then winning it again. But we're very glad that he's back in Parliament. He has been campaigning on this issue for many, many years as well, and it's wonderful to have you with us this evening. So without further ado, I will hand over to our wonderful compere.
Thank you, Ed. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? Does the microphone work? Is it on? Let's hope so. Hello and welcome to this event. I am Katie Razzall. I'm the BBC's Culture and Media Editor, and I have to say, of course, in my role, I have followed this debate about these 2,500-year-old sculptures for many years now, and even at times tried to get ahead of it. And I can tell you there is nothing like the flurry of emails and calls that you get when there is a random piece, like there was last week, in a random, I wouldn't like to call the critic that, but in a small publication that says that a deal has been done and George Osborne is going to hand these sculptures back to Greece, and I can tell you my job gets a lot harder at that point. It was denied. I should make clear, I am here to moderate. I am not taking a view or expressing a view, but I do feel like a tennis umpire here. So we'll see. And of course, our panellists, though, do take views, and they really need no introduction, but I'll do it fast. We have Sir Stephen Fry. We're very delighted that he's here. We're also delighted that Baroness Debbonaire, and then Lord David Frost, Mareva Grabowski-Mitsotakis, and Lord Stephen Parkinson have all given up their time. Now, you will notice quite quickly that this isn't like a traditional TV debate. This isn't the kind of thing I'm used to, in the sense that these people have not been picked because in equal numbers they are in favour and oppose the reunification, as some people put it, of the Parthenon sculptures. That wouldn't even work because there are 5 of them, so we wouldn't be able to do it equally anyway. But it isn't equal. But what they are able to provide, we hope, is insights into the wider thinking of the British and Greek governments, and even wider. And I do want to start with the name of this event in mind. I would like to ask you all first, you know, our event is set against the backdrop of the British Museum's master plan. That's the plan to build a museum of the future. Let's start with you, Baroness Debbonaire. What do you think a museum of the future looks like?
I mean, that's a wonderful question.
Thanks.
And I've been thinking about it. What does the Museum of the Future look like? I think a national museum should be a museum which cares for people as much as it cares for objects, which cares for what objects mean to people, which recognises that objects have stories, they have lives, that actually a museum isn't a prison cell in which things go in and never come out. It's actually a place where we can learn more about who we are, how we relate to each other now, in the past, and in the future. And in focusing on the Parthenon sculptures, I think the time is now for us to take our cue from the British people. Because when we've done polling, we've seen that just as we are cross-party and non-aligned here on this stage, and Ed and I co-chair the Parthenon Project together across party, we are able to come together with the British people, who, whether they vote Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, are overwhelmingly in favour of there being a solution. More than 50% of them are absolutely clear that the Parthenon sculptures should be reunited. Anyone who's been to the Acropolis Museum, as I was privileged enough to do last year with the Parthenon Project, will have seen those very poignant empty spaces which are waiting for their sibling sculptures to be returned to them. This is a question of a work of art that was divided. And I think the modern museum, just to finish on the answer to your question again, the modern museum is capable and robust enough to say, part of our story is to be part of this object story, and this object story, as it was parted, it is a work of art, but it's also sacred, it has religious and spiritual significance, it matters to the people of Athens. The people of Athens have built a museum that helps tell that story. It's time to keep that story moving and reunite them.
Lord Parkinson, how do you think that the BM the British Museum reimagines itself into the 21st century? What does that look like for you?
Well, I think in many ways it looks a lot like the British Museum has looked over the last 3.5 centuries. I think it's done a fantastic job. It is a monument in itself. It's an incredible gift to humanity, and it's one that it welcomes people from all over the world for free. We're very proud in this country that actually under Chris Smith as Culture Secretary in a former Labour government, we have completely free national museums. Last year, 6.5 million people from all over the world came and enjoyed the global collection that is in the museum in Bloomsbury. It's called the British Museum, but it is a global museum of our common human inheritance. And I think the wonderful thing about it is the scholarship at the museum, the extraordinary collection, the partnerships that it forges, and I think museums in the future absolutely should embrace many more partnerships in many more forms. But I think it's important that there is a role for the encyclopedic museum that tries to gather things from across the sweep of human civilization to show that interconnectedness. And as Thangan was saying, if we are to sort of bring people together and understand some of the things that unite us, then seeing objects from different eras, different geographies, and items on rotation, museums do and should loan their items. The British Museum loans around 2,000 items a year to institutions around the globe. That's absolutely a part of it. But particularly at a time when we're all a lot more conscious of the impact on the climate of global travel, and at a time when digitization allows for the exchange and scholarship of items more easily, actually sometimes I think we focus too much on where items are physically located and less on the insights that we're able. And the wonderful thing about these sculptures is, here we are 2,500 years later, still learning about them, still sharing, still exchanging insights about them. And whatever the item in the collection, whatever the museum, I think that continued pursuit of knowledge and scholarship is really important for museums.
But to be clear, when you think about the new museum, however it ends up, are you still seeing the Parthenon sculptures in that gallery?
I think that they are owned by the British Museum. That is a position in law. The British Museum, when I was Arts Minister, found myself often answering questions in Parliament about it, including on one occasion what we call a topical question in the House of Lords, which amused me. This is a topical issue and has been for 2 centuries and more. I was surprised at how there is a lot of misunderstanding, including within government, about the position. The British Museum is not prohibited in law from lending objects. I say it does that with about 2,000 of its objects every year. It has loaned some of the Parthenon sculptures in the past. There is nothing in law that prohibits it from doing so in the future. I know the British Museum is open to loaning any items in its collection to institutions that will borrow them on the basis of the law.
And so, Stephen Fry, in your view, what is a British museum for the 21st century?
Well, I'll come to that, but first I just want to say something about what Stephen said. It's extraordinary how over the last 15 years that I've been slightly involved with this issue, so much has come down to 2 words that you emphasised, I think quite deliberately, and I'm not saying there's anything bad about that, borrow and loan, to make it extremely clear that they belong to the British Museum, so that the Greek government is forced to accept that if it were to house them finally and see them reunited at the foot of the Acropolis, in the new Acropolis Museum in Athens, where the spaces are ready for them to be reunited. And I think it would be a shame if that word loan was the only one that was allowed. That they could be reunited in collaboration with the British Museum seems to me to avoid having to use the word loan, which is a bit of a slap to the Greek people who've waited 200 years patiently. And so anyway, I'll come back to the museum point, but I just wanted to remind people of the history to some extent. I'm sure most of you know this, but it's important to remember how this narrative is presented to politicians and to the public. In 1812, quite a year, Napoleon was on his way back from Moscow. The White House had been burnt by the British, and Lord Elgin had returned to London with bits of the Parthenon that he had sawn off. with apparently the permission of the occupying power in Greece at the time, the Ottoman Empire. There's no evidence that he had permission in the form of a Firman document, and people have argued about this for the best part of 200 years. Even in his own day, people like Lord Byron called him publicly a plunderer, which is what he was. But getting tied down in law is such a silly British thing to do. Yes, there is a law that says it belongs and you can't deaccess, but there are laws that have allowed deaccession. There was a law in 1990 that was passed in seconds that allowed the Public Record Office to generously give the Australian government its own constitution, which was in London. And there was a law that stopped them from doing it. But all that happened was some MPs got together and had a law. It actually had a specific name. The Australian Constitution, brackets, Public Record Copy, close brackets, Act 1990. Unbelievably specific. Didn't open the door to a catastrophic deaccessioning of museums. It was very specific, for a very specific reason, the constitution of a sovereign state. And the Parthenon is the equivalent of the constitution of the state, of the Hellenic Republic, which is going to be de jure 200 years old in 2030. In 1817, the Battle of Navarino settled, finally, the freedom, eleftheria, of the Greeks who had been rebelling against the occupying power. And a couple of years later, the Protocol of London sorted out the independence. Our relationship with Greece has been a profoundly warm one. And in the Second World War too, of course, and Churchill and others had a very, very strong and warm, and our royal family for obvious reasons.
But I would like to fast forward to now, because we're supposed
but for
to be
now,
looking
yes.
forward. What next? Not behind,
but
not back in the
the
day.
history is important because,
yes, of course.
Because, yes, I'm a Philhellene. I love Greece and Greek culture and always have. But I also love my own country. And I hate to see it looking so stupid, so stuck in the mud, so boringly lit, you know, the silly legal weeds that we're caught in, the talk of covenanting and all this nonsense. It's so easy if there is political will. Alexander went to Phrygia and he cut the Gordian knot with a sword. And the sword of political will cut the Gordian knot of the law that makes the British Museum insist, or not the British Museum, actually people like Lord Parkinson insist that it belongs to the British Museum in some strongly legal way. It can easily be overcome, and what will replace it will be the Parthenon experience. Technically, it's possible, of course, to cast something like the Parthenon marbles, and they were cast by Lord Elgin, and he took a copy up to Scotland. Now, I know a museum wants the original, but these days, with LiDAR and laser technology, every pit and pore of every flute and arris, every triglyph and metope of that extraordinary building will be perfectly reproduced, and people will be able to see with glasses no bigger than this in 2 years. I know this from my technical friends. They'll be able to see the Parthenon in the Duveen Gallery, or its new equivalent in the British Museum, in the reimagined British Museum. They'll be able to see the story of how the marbles came to England, how they stayed in the British Museum, how they were then packed up in crates, and then drone shots of them returning to Greece, where 1 million people in Athens will be there to welcome them, and the King and the Prime Minister will all hug each other, and Britain, for once in its bloody life, will have done something classy, something honourable, something wise, something the world will genuinely respond to and admire us for. And there will be no loss, because the British Museum will still get its 60 million visitors, only now they will see something rather remarkable. They'll also be able to see the Parthenon in its colour when it was painted. They'll see the Parthenon marbles as they were when they were kept in the museum, and then they'll have a version of them which was beautifully coloured as they were in the days of Periclean Athens.
Lord Frost. Well, there's Stephen Fry's view. We know some people agree with that. Lord Frost, I think perhaps you take a slightly different view on the past legals. Let's not get into that, and ownership and all of that. But in terms of now and the future, and how you think whatever's decided about the British Museum's master plan, what's your view on what next?
Well, I agree actually with a lot of what Stephen and others have said. I think your question on the museum, what is it for the British Museum? I think I would put some emphasis on the word British as well as museum. Yes, it's a museum of civilizations, but it ought also, in particular, to be a museum of the civilizations that shaped this particular civilization. And of course, Greek civilization is a huge part of that. And at a time when I think people are getting disconnected from their history, the sense of the civilization that made us, it's really important that the British Museum and institutions like it really sort of fill that gap and give people a sense of the story of where we came from and where we now are. So I guess that would be my particular take on what the museum could do. I think, what is the future specifically on this question? I think my own interest in it goes back to when I was a young diplomat years and years ago and was posted in that outpost of Hellenic civilization in Cyprus. But I learned my Greek in Greece and had happy time on the beach in Patras years and years ago with my Greek family. But it gave me an opportunity even then, this is the mid-80s, to see just how strongly people in Greece felt about this question. As you say, the museum as it then was, that had the gaps and still does have the gaps in its new formation. It very much struck me, and I think we do need to put this right. For me, there are kind of four things, just very quickly. One, it should be a gift. We should give back the sculptures without prejudice to the ownership argument. I don't see that we need to have a view on it if it's a gift.
And that would take the government to do that.
That would take the government to do it. There should be a copy in the gallery, as you say, Stephen. There should be rotating exhibits from Greece, some of the greatest works that we know from the museums of Athens, Olympia, and so on, and framed by a wider UK-Greece foundation. And all that seems to me to be eminently possible. We just need the political will to overcome the obstacles. And I think public opinion is beginning to change, so we just need to keep going.
And Mareva, if I could bring you in, you're the only Greek person on this, on our panel. I know you don't speak for your husband, the Prime Minister, who is presumably having these conversations. Well, we know he is. But can you contextualise for us? You'll be aware of the debates around museums and what should happen to them. But what does this look like from a Greek perspective?
So first of all, I'd like to say thank you because I had never met anyone on this panel, and it's a big privilege for me to be here and amongst these distinguished Philhellenes. It's very touching, honestly, to hear British people talking like this about the Parthenon sculptures. So I'm very grateful and thank you. I'm not here as my husband's wife. I am not on a formal role and on a capacity of governmental capacity. I'm not a politician. I'm basically a citizen, an active citizen that has been in the cultural sector for many decades, dealing a lot with heritage issues. So I thought that this is a time where, for me, along with other citizens, we have felt that it was the right time to make a case because there is an opportunity. There is a great opportunity. There is this win-win case. On the first hand, there's a win case for the British Museum in Britain. The reunification of the marbles is a unique case. It is not a case where you're returning artifacts to their home country, their country of origin. It is a unique case of reunifying fragments that tell a story. And it is crucial, and I am making this point, it is crucial for the restoration of the artistic, architectural, and historical integrity of the monument. It is very important. No one in Greece would like to see empty museums. But this is not a case of emptying museums. This is a case of putting back members of the body of this frieze back together, because this frieze has been dismembered. And when you see the pieces, the fragments that have come back from the Vatican upon the gracious gesture of the Pope, when you see the piece, the head, the bearded man, when you see the piece of the horse, when you see the piece of the boy returned and placed back to its rightful place, it really touches your heart. So I'm trying to make a point that this is not about emptying museums.
But
Now,
how practically can it work from your perspective, from a Greek perspective? If this is what you want, how practically can it work? What are you imagining? What are Greece offering?
Yes, so exactly. There have been discussions which have progressed, which are ongoing, between the government in Greece, George Osborne, and the British Museum. And there has been made great progress. The great progress is, the win-win situation is that we are offering, the Greek state is offering, on rotation, artifacts that have never left Greece, never left the museums in Greece, that nobody has seen. I mean, can you imagine this? What the people in the UK and all the guests of the British museums are going to be seeing?
That offer is on the table, is it?
That offer is on the table, discussed upon the reunification of the sculptures to the Acropolis Museum that was actually built for the only reason its existence is only there waiting for these sculptures to be reunited. So there is an ongoing dialogue, and I'm an optimistic person, and I would like to see this ongoing dialogue, until there is a landing zone. Do I know if there is a landing zone? I'm not sure, but I am hoping that there's a landing zone and that the UK will accept this offer about the rotation.
Do you think the Greek government has handled it well?
I think that they have been open. They're in open dialogue. They've spent a lot. They've given it everything it takes. I'm not the Greek government, but this is what I read. This is what I hear. And with all due respect, these sculptures, they belong to the temple. They belong to the monument, because the sculptor Phidias, in situ, sculpted these sculptures for that specific monument.
But tragically, they cannot be returned to that wonderful temple, and we cannot see them as Phidias intended us to see them. Sadly, so many of them have been lost down the centuries. The Venetian navies, a cannonball that ignited the Ottoman gunpowder inside did huge damage. Damage has been done to that wonderful building down the centuries, and they cannot be fully reunited. We will never see them as they are. I agree with you very much. We were talking before the panel about, before I was a minister, I made a visit to the Acropolis Museum. It is a wonderful museum, and it's a really very moving experience to go and visit the Parthenon, as I did in the early morning sunlight, and try to get a sense of what it must have looked when first constructed. But we will never see it. More than half of the marbles tragically have been lost down the years. So the question now is about how we get the largest possible number of people to see them, how we get the best dialogue, whether people see them in the Acropolis Museum at Athens, whether they see them in Bloomsbury, whether they see them in the Louvre in Paris or wherever, and try to understand the huge significance which nobody in the debate would seek to undermine. And Stephen Fry was absolutely right to focus on the law. I mean, he said we shouldn't get tied down in it, and in one sense he's right. If Parliament wanted to, it could change the law. But both the last government and the present government in the UK have said they've no plans to do so. And actually it's not necessary for a new partnership to happen. The British Museum does lend many items. Towards the end of my time as Arts Minister, both the British Museum and the V&A lent some gold to Ghana from the Asante collection.
I covered that story. That was my exclusive. In fact, what I would say about that is they could not lend it via the Ghanaian government because the Ghanaian government would not accept a loan. They had to do it through the Asantehene.
But crucially,
as a loan.
But the Asantehene was happy to sign a document
yes.
that acknowledged those two institutions as the current possessors and custodians of it, and that's what allowed that wonderful partnership to happen, and that exchange. And they're there on a 3-year loan under both of the museum's open individual export licenses, though that could be renewed at the end of the 3 years, depending on that partnership. And it's exactly what those two museums want to do. They are the custodians in law. But I think it is important. This is a debate that's gone on for a long time, and we can debate the legal position, and as Parliament has since 1816, about Lord Elgin's purchase from the Ottoman Empire. But if we want to take a stance now and say that we are standing up for the rule of law and doing things in an orderly way, and in a way that really does forge a deeper friendship between our two nations, because we have a very strong and lasting friendship in so many other ways, then I don't think we can or should try to fudge this. I think that would prolong the row with some of the marbles in a different place.
But what are you saying is a fudge?
Well, I think if a loan agreement were signed, like the one with the Asantehene in Ghana that recognised the British Museum's current ownership, then I don't think the British government could or should stand in the way of that loan under the 1963 Act.
But as I always say whenever I do something on the Today programme about this, but the Greeks won't accept a loan.
Exactly. And if that wasn't done, then I don't think a British government could or should allow it under the law as it stands. And I think that it's on that very small part of the discussion.
Well, thanks. You've looked at the legals, I think.
Stephen, you know that the British Museum Act and the regulations do not specify that there has to be a written signed statement saying we agree that you own things. And we've also got precedent. These were two very different issues, the example I'm going to give you, but they have one thing in common, and that is a willingness to accept agreement to disagree. When the Good Friday Agreement was signed, that was a conflict which in my lifetime, in my childhood, we never ever thought would be agreed. And part of the reason we got to agreement was the agreement to disagree. And I think if we can apply that principle, and if we also apply empathy, we can still stay within the law, because you and I think both agree that sculptures should be reunited. It isn't, as Mareva said so beautifully, it's not like something was taken, it was removed, and now it needs to go back. It was literally cut apart. And the fact that there are other fragments that are now missing doesn't take away from the fact it was cut apart. If we look down the road at Westminster Abbey, and while we, God forbid, were under occupation, the occupiers had said to somebody else, you can have this bit, here's a piece of paper proving that you now own it, we would want it back. We would.
But just get to the legals, that you think that there is a deal, there is a legal way through, is your belief.
To be done if we don't put in obstacles that don't need to be there. There is a deal to be done. There is a win-win solution. And I think it's not without the wit of man or politician or woman or Greek or British person to be able to find a way that you and I, Stephen, agree on so much on this issue. And if we start with what we agree on and what we agree with Mareva on and what we agree with the people of Athens on, there's so much of a landing zone. It's huge. And I think if we insist on disagreeing about the disagreement, then we're just never going to make progress. And as Stephen says, we will look small as a country. This is an opportunity for us to show who we are on the world stage in 2026. I'd quite like it to be 2026. 25 would be nice.
Yes.
And what about, Lord Frost, in your view, is this about political will?
Well, I mean, the political environment is what it is, and I can see why governments are open to this in opposition, and then they get to power and they're kind of less enthusiastic about taking through a controversial piece of primary legislation. But in the end, I think that's what it's going to need.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because you say it's controversial, and yet we're also hearing on this panel people saying, oh, most people in the British public agree that they should go back.
It'll be controversial within Parliament, undoubtedly.
And
this
presumably outside as well.
As a majority. Well, the polling is moving. I don't know how strongly, whether people feel as strongly, but I do feel we're sort of tying ourselves in knots on this question of what the legislation says and is it a loan and how long can a loan be and so on. We're kind of looking for a solution that reflects that framework rather than looking at what is the right solution and how do we make it happen. And every time we kind of show ourselves as bound by that, we cause ourselves problems. I was just looking, I brought my book of Cavafy poems, and there's always something opposite in it. And in Il Gran Rifiuto, he says, it comes to people in their lives to say yes or no, and many people bring themselves to say yes. You might be right in saying no, but it still undermines you all your life. And this is the case for us. We can say no, but I don't know what we gain by saying no any longer, and we ought to find a way to say yes.
And sometimes being friends is more important than being right. And the Greeks are our friends. They are our allies. And I think that's something which everybody in this room agrees with. We agree on so much, and that's where I think we can get progress.
I think if you think of analogy, I was trying to think how one would feel that's against it. So let's take Stonehenge. And you woke up one morning and you heard that a couple of pieces of Stonehenge are in the Louvre because somebody took them under some type of rule, I imagine, some type of rule, because we were under the Ottoman rule. We were never a colony, we were allies. How would it make you feel saying that you're asking for a loan of something that belongs to you? I mean,
so do you think the Greeks would accept, obviously not a loan, that's what you're saying, but would they accept an agreement to disagree, for example?
The agreement to disagree
on
is there, and we've been talking about it for at least 3 years now. I think there comes a moment in life where we have to accept that when there is a will, there is a way to do things. And it's
so
not.
Does that mean the will's not there then?
I feel, honestly, as a citizen, I'm not talking about the government. This is my personal opinion, that this ping pong that's going on between the British Museum, the trustees, and the government, one blaming the other. Oh, it's not your call, it's my call, or no, it's your other call, is just buying time for something that is not there. And we're sitting and we're being positive and we're trying to find a solution because it's like we need to see something. And it's in words, because there's a famous, as you mentioned, Cavafis. I saw another very big, very important poet, Greek poet called Ritsos, Yannis Ritsos. And he mentioned the power of words. At some point, we must find the words we are missing. At some point, find the words that will save us. The words that bring strength, the words that make dreams come true, the words that unite people. Let's find the words that will unify these sculptures, I say.
And so Stephen Fry, in terms of the words, I associate your words so much with one side of this debate. I'm intrigued by how you came to this, because it is something that you feel very strongly.
It is. I had a very dear friend whom some of you may have known, and many of you will have known of at least, Christopher Hitchens, the writer, journalist, polemicist, contrarian. He was always described in terms like that. And he was dying 15 years ago, and he bequeathed me this issue. He had been given it when as a young firebrand. He had been in Cyprus, and then he'd been in Greece marching against the colonels, and he'd befriended Melina Mercouri, the film actress, who was the first person to really make a case for the reunification of the marbles, of the sculptures, back in the 60s and early 70s. And he took up the case and wrote a wonderful little book about it. And as he lay dying in Washington, D.C., and he said to me, I'm not going to leave you Palestine or the issue of Islamofascism or the corruption of the Clintons. Other people can take up that cause. He said, I want you to pick up the tattered flag of the Parthenon marbles and wave it anew. And I promised him I would. And I read from his book at his memorial, and I've taken it in that personal way, because he was such a passionate campaigner for just causes, and someone who wouldn't put up with mealy-mouthed, temporizing and so on. And he believed in a Gordian knot where it worked. It doesn't mean you trample down law and you don't believe in law, but that you understand that the law is the people, and that the people can change the law and make the law better. And I believe in this for Britain's sake. I just think we are continuing to look in a way that Britain used to look, as sort of grey and muddled and pedantic and casuistic about these things, in ways which are totally irrelevant to what is the real cause of seeing those. Because when the king, which I hope he will, travels, I don't want to say what he believes, but I don't think he would be unhappy at the idea of travelling to his father's country land of Greece and seeing these things installed with the president of the Hellenic Republic. It would be a great moment in our joint history. And if it happened to wait till next year, this is when what's the right word, annexatisia, the independence of Greece, really became a glory for Britain. It was Admiral Codrington who won the Battle of Navarino. He was a veteran of Trafalgar, and it was the last naval battle fought under sail. It was a romantic British triumph, and it was a British triumph for Greece, and it allowed Greece to stand as an independent nation. And our relationship is so important to Greece and to British people who understand diplomacy and understand how our reputation in the world depends on forging honest links, because there are two Britons in diplomatic history. There's the honourable Britain that does the right thing, that intervenes and helps countries, and there's perfidious Albion that lies and cheats and prevaricates. And I believe in that honourable Britain, and I think we can bring this home, and we will all be so proud.
And in a few minutes, we are going to take some questions, and so Stephen is going to slip off in 4 minutes or so. But Mareva, I just want to go back to something that you said. Are you saying, what I was picking up from what you were saying is, are you saying that George Osborne isn't in earnest in this? Is this what you're saying? Because I've sat in the British Museum where he said,
No, not at all, not at all. No. I didn't say that.
I'm just wondering what you were saying, because you were saying this has been going on for ages and the deal is there. And
no, what I was saying is that we aren't there yet, because we've been having these discussions, and there's a positive aspect, and there's a dialogue between George Osborne, the trustees, I wouldn't say the government, because the dialogue is between the British Museum, George Osborne, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, George Ierapetridis, and the Prime Minister, Kyriakos Mitsotakis. I'm saying that there is an open dialogue and that they're trying to find a landing zone. As a citizen, my point of view is that this has been going on for 3 years, and there's a lot of, it's the government, no, it's the trustees, and I feel as a citizen, and a lot of citizens, and it's the public also, it's the public opinion feels that, okay, isn't it time to really conclude on something here? You know, whose is it? I would never say he's trying really hard, and that's why I said I'm optimistic. But I would like to see finally something, and because there is an imminent renovation. This museum is about to close. It's West Wing.
Not closing.
No, it's
staying open.
Yeah, its West Wing is going to be shutting down. So there has to be some, and not only that, there's a fundraising that's going on, that's going to start, because this is a $1 billion project, from what I've heard. And I would like to see what's going to happen for the next 10 years. So I would like to see some actual movement. There's a momentum, but I would like to see something a bit more. And this is, and I want to say that these type of dialogues are extremely important. Not only because they make me feel, I'm very emotional when I hear that there are so many philhellenes, and the public opinion in the UK is also very touching, that you see more and more people believe that it is a question of identity for the Greeks. Identity is something that's extremely important. Our history, our ancestors, it's where we come from, it's who we are, and we're associated. And objects have stories. You're absolutely right.
And I'm going to let Sir Stephen go because
I'm afraid.
he has another appointment. It's not better than this, but he just had that first. I don't know if there are any questions, but if there are any questions, please raise your hands. And while you're mulling on your brilliant questions, I think I had a question just from for Lord Frost and Lord Parkinson. Just, he's in your party. What's your view on George Osborne's game plan? What he's up to? Is he in earnest in this? What's he thinking?
Shall I go first? Well,
do you chat happily?
The short
all the
answer
time?
I'm glad I'm not a politician.
The shorter answer is I've no idea.
He's not calling you up and giving you inside intel.
Maybe others on this panel and in this room know what the nature of these discussions is. I don't. I only see what I read in the media. And I suspect George Osborne isn't particularly interested in taking advice from me, really. But if he were, I would say I think it's important to make this dialogue and these discussions transparent now. I think people are, the lack of transparency is generating a degree of suspiciousness about what exactly is up and why. And I thought that last week's piece in The Critic kind of captured that. You know, the reaction to it showed that people were a bit edgy about it. And I think you should come out and say, this is what we're trying to do, these are the constraints, these are the possibilities, make the case and try and bring people with it.
Absolutely.
I think absolutely the British Museum is engaging faithfully in dialogue. Actually, I've got a bit more sympathy than David does about the need for that dialogue sometimes to go on quietly in private before things can be... I was always struck when answering questions in Parliament about that you don't always get an awful lot of coverage as a junior minister in the House of Lords, but on this issue, the column inches in the UK, in Greece and elsewhere were always quite substantial, even when there weren't many new details details to say. So I think it's great and absolutely right that there's dialogue. I think, as I say, the British Museum is looking for partnerships with organisations around the world. And I want to come back to the 63 Act, because it's not a sort of pedantic and sort of pernickety point, but I think it's really important that the British Museum and the Acropolis Museum, as two of the world's leading museums, if there's a deal to be done here, show that it can be done on the basis of legal understanding. That's what's allowed for the loan to the Santahini of the items there. But, you know, as Thangam says, we agree on a lot, but I hope she'd agree as well that there is a risk that if you try and fudge the issue, then you create a difficult predicament, not just for other items in the British Museum's collection, but for museums around the world who are engaging with these sorts of issues on many other objects that excite similar passions in other countries. And I don't want us in 200 years' time to be having, you know, the same sort of row about what George Osborne did or didn't sign as we are still having about whether Lord Elgin had a firman
But they're not equal and opposite, though, are they, Stephen? I mean, it's you know, the speculation about whether or not we're arguing about, you know, about George Osborne in 20 years' time would not be the same as speculating about whether or not Lord Elgin did or did not legally bring them.
But it's possible to do an agreement as, you know, as the British Museum's done with.
It is, but it's also possible to find that route to respectful disagreement, and I think that's the problem. Is we have surmounted so many things which we did not think we could surmount. We have got through so many disagreements. I actually feel a bit like the public opinion turning towards a yes at the time is now. You could say, and I think we possibly both would as politicians, that that's because the public has never read the British Museum Act 1963. I mean, it's really short.
It does also usually depend on what the question is when it's asked.
Exactly. And it depends on what the question is, and it depends on how you frame it. And I agree with that. But I also think that there is a way for us to see that people are incredibly weary of polarisation. Just as we might all say the world's so polarised at the moment, everybody hates everybody and everything's terrible. I don't necessarily think that's true.
And not true on this panel.
And exactly.
I'm going to interrupt because I do want to know if anyone does have a question, because yes, we do. So one at the front here, and then at the... Oh, well, perhaps we'll go there first because you've got the microphone. Sorry about that.
Hello, my name is Gonda van Steen, and I would like to ask a question from the perspective of an educator. I teach at King's College London. You spoke about the public opinion, but I like to bring in the dimension of an intergenerational set of opinions. We can take, as educators, we take the pulse of the younger generation constantly. And I'm in a Center for Hellenic Studies and Classics department. We have some pretty smart students in front of us. They take well to causes, sustainability, landscapes that have their own integrity, temples that have their own integrity. If we don't defend those causes, we have no arguments for a younger generation.
So do you have a question, madam?
Yes. What will happen when we get so entrenched in a position that British Museum is now taking that we have no explanation for our younger, smart British students and others?
Who would like to answer that?
I think that's a good illustration of the fact that museums, for me, should be as much, if not more, about people than objects, and that they should be involving the people to whom those objects mean the most in telling the story of their future. And by the way, Stephen, I agree with you. I think legislators shouldn't break the law. I'm with you. I believe in the rule of law. It's a fundamental principle of democracy. But where did we get democracy from? At the risk of bringing a cliche out, you know, the clue's in the name. Yeah. And I think we have to find that way of being able to involve young people, but I would say young Greek people of diverse political backgrounds, young British people of diverse political backgrounds. I think the lumping together as well of saying young people think this or young people think that, I'm sure you absolutely agree, they bring a diversity of thought as well, but it is their future story and Greek young people's future story that we're making decisions about. Sam.
Okay, my name is Andrew George, and thank you to Ed earlier for giving me the name check. I'm MP for West Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, and I chair the British Association of the Reunification of the Parthenon Sculptures. We're having an event in Parliament on the 16th of July to try and advance at least the education of parliamentarians, at least that evening, and Stephen will be an honoured guest along with others. My question is, I mean, having come back after a 9-year sabbatical, having passed the insanity test to get back in, I'm just seeking the advice of the panellists as to how to advance the cause amongst parliamentarians, given that the difficulty of advancing this issue is not, is not preordained by God or nature or science or whatever your faith is, but is actually the grubby legal texts produced by man and woman. That therefore, what should we be doing as parliamentarians in order to facilitate the right thing, the honourable thing, the classy thing, as Stephen described it, in order to advance this case? I mean, there are a lot of tools that Thangham is aware of available to backbench parliamentarians, EDMs and presentation bills and so on. The tools that are available to advance the cause. It would just be useful to get thoughts about that. Thank you very
polling.
much.
Yeah, polling.
Will you pass that back to Lord Sumption, please? Thanks. Sorry.
Polling.
Polling?
Yeah, when I speak to my colleagues up the red end, most colleagues, I think, very quickly say, oh yeah, we've got to find a solution. They don't necessarily disagree with Stephen or disagree with me. They just want to, there is a commitment, there is a political will. The other end, where people have to face the electorate once every 4 years, I think they think their constituents don't like it. And I think one of the clear ways that we can help with that, and I would also say, and salute to my friend Ed, God loves a sinner who repenteth, and he introduced himself like that. I think helping people to understand that it is possible to change your mind, and on an issue where there doesn't need to be a culture war, why make a culture war, particularly if you thought your constituents didn't like it, but actually, here's some polling.
Well, unlike Ed, I tried to do my thinking while minister, and I find myself, sorry, I tease him because he's a friend and colleague. But actually, I find myself saying much the same thing tonight as I used to say at the dispatch box. I think it's quite important, actually. We should encourage parliamentarians in both houses to read the 1963 Act. It may not do as much as some in this room want, but it doesn't prohibit as much as some may think. And I think it's really important that any deal the British Museum does on any item in its collection is done in accordance with that 63 Act.
Lord Sumption.
Is it open to someone speaking from the floor to explain in a few sentences what the case is for keeping these artefacts permanently in Bloomsbury? Because that's a case which I think needs to be made, especially in present company.
As long as it turns into a question quite fast.
It won't turn into a question, but it will, I hope, provoke some discussion.
Fair enough.
I would agree with what has been said primarily by Stephen Fry, that this is not primarily a legal issue, and it's not a historical one. It is a moral issue. And the moral problem is this. As Mrs. Mitsotakis has said, it is impossible to restore the integrity of the monument to which these artefacts belong. They have been severed in 2 stages, one by Lord Elgin in between 1804 and 1807, and secondly by the Greek Archaeological Service since 1979. So that the severance is not in itself a crime. I think that everybody agrees that they can't go back onto the monument. That being so, the restoration of the integrity of the monument is simply impossible. And quite apart from that, about a quarter of the panels were already lost in Lord Elgin's time. We know that because there are French drawings which record them. They undoubtedly existed only 50 years before. They were disappearing quite fast. So the question really is, in which museum are these severed fragments to go? Are they to go where they have rested uncontentiously until 1981, when the Greek government first made its claim, in the place where it has existed for 2 centuries, longer than there has been a Greek state? Or are they to be in the Acropolis Museum? Now, I do not see that there is any real moral impediment against the fact that they are divided between 2 major centres. To my mind, the only moral case for reuniting them, as it's called, is based on Greek cultural nationalism. And I do not see why, in Britain, we should have any particular sympathy for that. If this is a strong moral case, then the same moral case will apply to the sculptures of Vaizey, to the famous Assyrian reliefs in the British Museum, to the great gates of Nineveh, to the Rosetta Stone, and to much of the Egyptological collections, not only of the British Museum, but of most of the great archaeological museums of the world. This is a recipe for dismantling the great archaeological collections of the Louvre and the Met, as well as the British Museum. It seems to me that that would be a step which would impoverish public education. And I very much hope for that reason, as I think many people not present in this room do also, that the trustees have the guts to perform their trust and retain their objects in London.
And you're right, Lord Sumption, that will no doubt provoke some responses. I wanted to add one thing as well, just that my understanding is clearly the language around this is often very emotive, and we were talking earlier about someone was talking about soaring off. My understanding as well, I don't know what the panel thinks, is that just a little under half, certainly it wasn't soaring, that they were either built into other buildings or were found on the ground. So we use there's language used that is quite inflammatory.
I think that this is a very colonial mindset and very outdated.
But it may well be a mindset that many share in Britain.
No, 1 second. I think it's very outdated and inappropriate. I would say that it's very difficult to argue with such a mindset in 2025. It's like living in another century. I'm not sure.
But what about the Greek nationalism point?
Yeah, no, it's not about a Greek nationalism. It's about pride, integrity, and history. It's not about nationalistic. You're telling a story of democracy. Democracy is at stake right now, all over the world, whether it's from the left or from the right. I'm not going to argue about that. What is this frieze telling you? What is it telling you? How can you argue that this should be in Britain, should stay, or half should be there and half should be in Greece? It's a completely, there's a paradox about this. I'm sorry, and this is, to me, is just not even a question. It reminds me of other, it's insulting. It's not even an issue of where they, historical facts, arguments. It's an insult to Greek people, and thank God that the government has no such attitude. The government and George Osborne, they would never say such a thing.
I must say, I don't think you'll win many converts to the argument with the sort of language you just used, to be honest. I think Lord Sumption makes a strong case in general about the principles of Western museums and how they maintain their collections and what they are there to do. I think it's perfectly legitimate to argue. I don't think it's colonial to make the argument that the sculptures should remain in the British Museum. I think the right argument to make is it's better that they are in Athens and that it's a better arrangement. It's win-win for both sides. It's part of a new partnership. I think if we get bogged down in the the arguments about ownership and cultural nationalism and colonialism and so far, we will never solve this problem. It has to be forward-looking if we're going to solve it.
And I think we do have time for one more question. Have you got the microphone, sir?
No.
Thank you.
Oh, no, sorry. Apologies.
Thank you very much. I'm Paul Cartledge. I'm a member of the British Committee for the Reunification. I wanted to thank Mr. Leffas for organising this event and for what he does with his colleagues towards the reunification. I have a very specific question. I have it on very good authority, the highest authority within the British Museum, that there are potential donors to this fund which will possibly amount to well more than £1 billion, not euros as was stated, to rehang the West Range of the British Museum.
but there are donors who are holding a sword of Damocles over the head of the director of the British Museum. If you give them back, under whatever terms and conditions, for whatever reason, we will not fund your museum. And if they're
What donors?
Sorry?
What donors?
I'm not in a position to name them. And of course, the director of the British Museum was not in a position to name them to me. My question to the panel, by the way, thank you so much for all your contributions, which are very different, and I agreed much more with some than with others, and I won't specify which. I'd just like to hear your view. Suppose you were to encounter such a donor. What argument would you put to him or her to persuade them that it is the right thing to do, to give away, give back the marbles? By the way, the Elgin marbles are not all the Elgin collection. People very often mistake. Elgin's collection is much, much bigger. The Greek government has always only ever wanted to reunify the Parthenon marbles. And there's some specific reason why the same architect, Ictinus, did the Parthenon and Basse, but the Greek government's not asking for the Basse sculptures back. There's a good reason for that. Anyway,
yes, so that's your question. Your question, and I think all of you have already possibly answered that, which is what's the reason why you think, but what argument would you make to a donor who allegedly is saying they won't give the money if you give the...
I think donors are really important for our museums. And I think a donor that wants a genuine partnership isn't a donor that just lays down conditions, but that's also got to work both ways. I think we're in a really difficult situation, by the way, on donors, and I don't want to drift off topic, because I think there are other people and other actors who are trying to lay down conditions for museums, galleries, and other artistic organisations. That's a problem too. I think developing partnerships with our corporate and private donors is really, really important, and I don't think that a genuine partner of any cultural organisation usually comes to the table with such a rigid museum policy, any more than I, when I was Shadow Secretary of State, or Stephen when he was actual minister, would say to a museum, you must hang this painting in this way or not in that way. That's not our business. As politicians, neither is it the business of good donors, and my experience is they don't do that.
Indeed, yeah. And the trustees of most museums, you know, they're not looking for backseat drivers in any direction. They take their responsibilities, museums right across the country, whatever the governing statutes of their institution, as custodians, very, very seriously. But I think the question underlines the importance for me of being able to do a deal within the law. I think that's really important for the British Museum as such a landmark museum, not just in the UK but globally, to be able to show that it is possible to have partnerships within the law. It's possible to have donors that don't agree with each other on the direction, but for people to come and see and encounter items from across the span of human existence. I think that's what attracts so many people, whether they're donors or visitors, to the British Museum.
I'm afraid our time is up. That is it for questions. That is it from me, apart from to say thank you to everybody, and including, of course, Stephen Fry, who's left us, and to you all for being here. And we're going to hear just a last word, I think, from Lord Ed Vaizey.
Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful and spirited debate. And obviously, I go to a lot of debates about the future of the Parthenon Sculptures. And I just wanted to pick up on 2 or 3 points that I thought were really interesting as the debate developed. One, it pains me to say it, was made by David Frost. I thought David Frost made the point about transparency. I thought that was a really important point. I agree with what he said. I think it has come, the time has come. There is so much speculation that I think it is time for George Osborne simply to put his cards on the table. We know what the deal that George Osborne wants to achieve. And by the way, he is very sincere about it. He would like to be a chairman who moved the dial on the Parthenon Sculptures, but we know that he wants to achieve a partial loan in return for the opportunity to exhibit great Greek artifacts in the UK. That is the deal on the table, and to a certain extent it can take place in public. And I thought the other thing that was interesting when Stephen Fry mentioned the replica of creating a replica of the sculptures. I've always thought that was a bit of a red herring. Nobody particularly wants to see a replica. But then the thought occurred to me that if these sculptures do go back to Greece, to have a replica and the opportunity for the British Museum to tell an extraordinary story in some way, an extraordinary moment in the history of these sculptures, which are 2,500 years old, 200 years in Britain, and the story and everything around it is its own unique narrative. So I think a replica and an exhibit of the Parthenon sculptures in the British Museum and their story in their relationship with Britain would be a really important part. As far as the donors who are refusing to fund the British Museum, if they give them back, we've got Greeks. We've got Greeks who will more than outmatch them, don't we, John Lafaz? You won't give $1 billion, we'll give $2 billion. Stick that in your sculpture pot and do whatever. It's invidious of me to pick anyone out, but I just want to say a huge thank you to Stephen Parkinson. It only occurred to me halfway through the debate that he was outnumbered 4-1. And he came here... he came here with his usual good grace and put his points elegantly, as he always does. He is right. He was the only culture minister capable of thinking for himself. And in that sense, he is unique. And thank you as well to Katie Razzall for doing her usual wonderful job for comparing such a brilliant debate. And Mrs. Mitsotakis, we were honoured by your presence as a humble Greek citizen coming here to give us your point of view. Thank you all so much.
Please join us next door for a reception. Just next door for a reception. Thank you.